we will go on to the gut-brain connection to dementia and diabetes. I'm going to say a quick prayer before I begin the actual health talk. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to study both science and Scripture. I pray that as we do, you would bless us. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I'm going to tell you, I shared this with you before, and I shared last time when I talked about weight loss that after my wife and I got married, we got bigger and bigger and bigger and began to have some health issues. You can see I was a little bit bigger back then. I did weigh more, and somebody caught me speaking somewhere, and not the most flattering look there, but it gives you a little idea of, I think somebody shot that, it was on the internet, it's like, oh, I should take that. It kind of reminds me of those days. So it's interesting how, I'm going to share with you one of the most fascinating studies I've ever heard. This is, I call it the bland nutrient-filled mush study. That's not the technical term of the study. But they did a study where they took normal weight people and morbidly obese people, and they gave them the exact same diet. They were in a medical ward. What that means is they were basically in a facility where they couldn't get out, so they couldn't sneak food. So they were stuck in this situation, and the only food they gave them was through this basic, like a straw, and you had to push a button, and it would pump out this white mush. And this white mush had very little flavor. It was extremely bland. It didn't taste good. It didn't taste bad, but it just was not enjoyable. There's nothing enjoyable about it, but like I said, it didn't taste bad. And so, but it had all the nutrients they needed. And so they'd have to push the button, and they were being recorded how many calories they would take in every day. And so they took normal weight individuals, and these people would go up to that thing, they'd push the button and push the button. And what they found is these people maybe who before they were ever introduced into this medical ward, they measured how much calories they were eating on a regular basis. And if they were eating 300 calories a day beforehand, when they would push the button, they would eat about the exact same amount of calories. Now, they didn't know how many calories they were eating, but their body just kind of let them know, yeah, that's enough. And so they ate just as much of the tasteless mush as they did normally. Then they took these morbidly obese patients, the exact same experience. They would push the button, and they would taste this stuff, and it didn't taste great, it didn't taste bad, but it didn't taste good. And meaning they weren't like, oh, that's good. And the morbidly obese patients would consume about 150 to 275 calories per day. They could not get themselves to eat something that didn't taste good. And so they were losing massive amount of weight, which was okay because they were morbidly obese, and so it didn't hurt them to lose weight. It was actually beneficial to them. And they just simply couldn't get themselves to eat food that didn't taste fantastic. And that was kind of an interesting thing. And I know a fellow who was also obese, categorized specifically. Because remember, the term obese is not an insult, it's just a mathematical equation. There's overweight and there's obese. Basically, if your BMI is 25 or above, you're considered overweight. If it's either, I can't remember, 30 or 35, you're considered obese. You may remember, I should know that. But the point is, it's just a mathematical number. And this fellow was obese, and when he came down with COVID, he lost his sense of smell and taste. And so after that, it was hard for him to eat food anymore. Because the reason he would eat was for the pleasure of the food. And that's part of why we eat. I'm not putting anybody down. I like food too. And but the trouble is when somebody really struggles with obesity, often they cannot get themselves to eat something that is not unbelievably flavorful. It is just almost impossible to put food that is not extremely tasty. And so this is interesting. So learning, but the good news is that after about 1 to 2 weeks, your taste buds change and you begin to like simpler food. But the only way to get to that point is if you stick it out for a time, and your taste buds will begin to change and you'll like simpler food. It just takes time, though, it takes patience. So let's move on to our looking at Alzheimer's disease. Dementia and Alzheimer's are some of the most dreaded diseases. Over 10% of the population over 65 has Alzheimer's. That's a staggering statistic. And the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 7:25, I applied my heart to know and to search and seek out wisdom and the reason of things. So we want to begin to discover what are some of the causes. We're not going to go in, I could do an entire session. There's 3 major causes probably of dementia or Alzheimer's. One of them is inflammation. And inflammation is often caused by poor lifestyle, bad diet. The second reason for dementia is, so we have inflammation. The second one is nutrition. Poor diet, once again, can cause inflammation, but poor nutrition itself can also, even without the inflammation, may cause dementia or Alzheimer's. And the third thing is toxicity. Toxicity could come from heavy metals like mercury and other heavy metals, or it could come from things like mold in the house. Having a moldy house can make somebody more prone to come down with dementia. So it could be any one of those things. So if somebody had a really good diet, but they have mold in their house, it doesn't matter how good the diet is, for some people that mold is going to cause them to get dementia. That's why it's, as much as possible, if you can clean up or remedy, have remediation for the mold, that's something that can be beneficial. But somebody could have inflammation and not have mold, and they could get dementia or Alzheimer's. You get the idea. So the point is, it's not that there's one cause, and it could be a mixture of the three. It could be all three, or it could be just one of them. But if you're eating a terrible diet, and you don't have mold, you can still get it. So I think you get the idea there. But looking at this, and this one, the Bible also says in Job 26, verse 16, or 29, verse 16, and the cause which I knew not, I searched out. So we want to look for the cause. We've just talked about some of the potential causes, but blood sugar issues can be another one, which also can have to do with diet, but we'll come back to that. Well, what is disease? Well, disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. In case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained, unhealthful conditions should be changed, wrong habits corrected, then nature is to be assisted in her efforts to expel impurities and to reestablish right conditions in the system. So we want to find, okay, what is causing it in my situation, and is there anything I can do to remedy it? And you may know about Dr. Dale Bredesen. He has shown that he's had a number of patients fully reverse their dementia or Alzheimer's. People who had to quit working because of their Alzheimer's and were able to go back to work and carry on a normal lifestyle, but it was a very regimented lifestyle. You had to exercise repeatedly. And if you went back and you had to eat a very strict diet, and if you went back to your old diet and lifestyle, very rapidly the dementia would return. So it's not like a trick, like, haha, do this for a few weeks. It is a lifestyle that has to be kept up, and it has to be quite rigorous. And I'm not going to go into all that here, but the progression of Alzheimer's, you have a nice healthy brain in the beginning, but it slowly deteriorates till you have these less and less brain. Actually, it's a kind of terrifying to look at. But there's something called lacunar strokes. A study reported in the American Diabetes Association Diabetes Care, looking at diabetics, pre-diabetics, and non-diabetics, and they scanned their brains. For participants, ages range from 40 to 75. They were looking for lacunar infarcts, which are acute strokes where an artery has been blocked in the white matter of the brain. And what did they find? They discovered that 61% of pre-diabetics had these strokes within their brain, these small strokes, and 67% of diabetics. So being a pre-diabetic is nearly as bad for having a stroke as being a full-blown diabetic. This is significant. And researchers have looked at people with both pre-diabetes and diabetes and have found both groups have cognitive impairment, and it is worse in those with full-blown diabetes. So it's a danger in both cases. Well, according to the American Academy of Neurology, those who have a larger waistlines in their 40s have higher chances of dementia in their 70s. And those who have a large waist in their 40s and are overweight have 2.3 times greater risk of dementia. And, well, what about diabetes and dementia? We looked a little bit there, but according to the Journal of the American Medical Association Internal Medicine, blood sugar issues related to diabetes can increase rates of dementia. But dementia can also exacerbate blood sugar issues and cause a vicious cycle. And you may have heard that in some cases they're calling Alzheimer's disease potentially type 3 diabetes. You've probably heard of type 1, type 2, maybe even type 1.5, but you probably haven't heard of type 3, and that could be the dementia associated with too high blood sugar. Well, You may know that in the book of Daniel, the first, according to medical historians, they look back to the oldest scientific study in history. And they have come to the conclusion that the oldest study that they've been able to find, and they say this, I'm not making this up, they say in the medical journal, the oldest study they've been able to find is Daniel chapter 1, where Daniel and his friends go on a plant-based diet and the impact that it had on their cognition. And I said there, this was the study, test your servants, I beg you, for 10 days and let them give us pulse to eat, or vegetables to eat, and water to drink. The King James says pulse, and which were plant-based things that grow from seeds. And they actually done a study that they call a Daniel fast, which is actually not a fast. It's a scientific study. They took 43 people. They were put on a diet similar to the one found in Daniel chapter 1, and they ate a higher amount of carbohydrates on the diet and less protein. And by the way, it wasn't like candy bars and junk food. These were whole, unrefined carbs like beans and whole grains. And during the diet, they had lower blood sugar and blood lipid levels. So their blood work actually got better eating more carbohydrates in their whole form, not in the refined form. And they were not diabetics, but they ended up showing less insulin resistance. You say, what is insulin resistance? You're going to fully understand it in just a few minutes, what insulin resistance is. Now, diabetics are twice as likely to have depression compared to non-diabetics. You may say, I got diabetes, who cares? I'm not really worried about it. But nobody wants to be depressed, right? And same thing with heart disease. People with heart disease have like roughly a 50% higher chance of having depression also. And so many of these things, what affects the body affects the brain, because the brain is a part of the body. Right? And the Bible says in Deuteronomy 6:24, the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes. He gave us a bunch of laws. Why? For our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. Everything God commanded us in the Bible is for our own benefit. He didn't just say to do things just to see if we would do them. He knew that the things that he asked us to do were beneficial to us. And we're going to jump forward. So, stats on diabetes. It's the 7th leading cause of death in the U.S. Diabetics spend over twice as much on health care. And both prediabetes and diabetes are factors in strokes, heart attack, and hypertension. Around 65% of people with diabetes end up with a stroke or a heart attack. And diabetes is the foremost cause of blindness, kidney failure, and amputations that are not from accidents. And it's very common for diabetics that after years they have to have a toe cut off, and then maybe a foot cut off, and then maybe even a leg before end up having a stroke or a heart attack. Well, often people think about, oh, it's just my genes. It's just my genes. You know, grandma had it, dad had it, and I'm predestined. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, here's some interesting thing about this, is that identical twins have the identical genes. When one identical twin has type 1 diabetes, the other has less than a 40% chance of having diabetes. So even type 1 is not a genetic destiny, right? Even if you have somebody with identical genes to you, they have less than a 40% chance of coming down with the very same disease. So there is a genetic component, but there's something within the lifestyle or environmentally that causes the disease. You may have heard the saying that genetics load the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger, right? And so that's not to be an insult, because it could be lifestyle or it could be environment. Something could happen environmentally that could also cause it. And the American diabetes, oh, by the way, back to genes, the genetics for like type 2 diabetes, so for instance, certain genes that you have are like dictators. For instance, if you have the gene for blue eyes, you're going to have blue eyes. You're just going to have it. But if you have the gene for diabetes, it's not a dictator. You're not just going to have diabetes. It's if grandpa had diabetes and dad had diabetes and you have their genes, well, if you live the same lifestyle as grandpa and dad, well, you'll probably get it. But if you live a different lifestyle, you may actually avoid it, because it's not a dictator. It's more like a committee saying, here's a suggestion, but it's up to you. It's up to you. So we see the American Diabetes Association says there is no cure for diabetes, but it can be managed. I can't believe these organizations are in existence. They don't deserve a dime of any human being's money, because they're lying. Every day of the week, people are going to centers across the United States and across the world. They're fully reversing their diabetes. These kind of places, they ask for your money, and then they lie to the whole world, saying nobody. You can take somebody. Almost anybody with type 2 diabetes within 6 months of lifestyle changes can fully. 90% of people, 95% of people can fully reverse it. So to have these institutions, these multi-million or billion-dollar institutions, say this, I'm not trying. It does frustrate me that these big conglomerates just lie to people. And I'm not making it up. Dr. Dean Ornish, one of the top scientists in the United States, many of you have heard of him. Dean Ornish, he's a medical doctor. He says that by changing diet and lifestyle, 95% of people can reverse their diabetes. Dr. McDougall says 100% of type 2 diabetics can reverse their diabetes. So somewhere between 95 and 100% of people can through lifestyle. And people in institutions that have helped people reverse type 2 diabetes for decades, or Dr. McDougall just mentioned, Dr. Joel Furman, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Esselstyn, and Adventist Health Retreats across America. This is a regular occurrence. They've been doing these things for 100 years. And with exercise and an optimal diet, you can anticipate, generally within the first week, medications are cut down by 50%. Now, I'm not doing that. You have to work with your physician to cut your meds down. But I'm sharing this because this is very important to know that with an optimal diet and lifestyle, you can anticipate your meds need to be cut down probably often by 50% within the first week. Within a month, you continue decreasing by about 6 months, cutting nearly every medication. And this is why you have to be in touch with your doctor. Your blood sugars could drop dangerously low if you're not working with your doctor. And it's not because it only drops too low if you keep taking the medication, because the certain medications, metformin, if you're on that, will not push your blood sugar too low. But insulin, for example, can push your blood sugar too low, and you could die while simultaneously living on a healthy diet. So you have to be watching your blood sugar and working with your doctor to taper that off if your blood sugar is going down. So I'm going to talk to you about something called glycosylation. You can tell maybe that sounds a bit like glucose. Basically, if you eat a meal, standard meal is going to have the 3 major macronutrients. That's proteins, fats, and carbohydrate. And the carbs, some of them break down into a simple, not all of them. I mean, fiber is a carb, but it doesn't spike your blood sugar. But some of the carbohydrates will break down into a simple sugar called glucose. And glucose is actually beneficial in a healthy amount, but it is detrimental when it spikes. It's kind of like if you imagine honey. So you eat a meal with proteins, fats, and carbs, and some of those carbs will go into the bloodstream, and if it gets too high, it begins to coat the blood vessels. It will damage nerves and these kinds of things. And also what it does is it sticks to blood cells themselves, red blood cells, and what ends up happening is there is something called hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is in the blood, and the sugar that you eat, some of it will attach to the hemoglobin and will stick to it, and they can measure how much sugar over the last 90 to 120 days has stuck to your red blood cells. And depending on how much sugar has stuck to it, they will do a test on you to find out if you're a diabetic called the hemoglobin A1C test. And you don't need to memorize this, but if you've ever gone to your doctor, and basically this is what if they tell you, if your A1C is 6.5 or above, you're considered a diabetic. If it's 5.7 to 6.5, you're considered a pre-diabetic. If it's below 5.7, you are considered normal. And for every 1 point increase, so if you go from 5.7 to 6.7, for every 1 point increase, you increase your chance of dying by 21%, your chance of a heart attack by 14, amputation by 43, kidney disease, vision loss, and nerve damage by 37%. So if you went up 2 points, you get the idea, you're at 42% increased risk of death, and it just goes up from there. And some people can be way higher than 6. They could be 13 or more. And so you get the idea that really increases the risk of death. And so, jumping forward, let's give you an idea quickly how to diagnose type 2 diabetes, and then I'm going to share with you, you're going to understand what probably many of you have never understood how diabetes works. Even if you've had it for years, you probably didn't know. So, just as we saw, to diagnose diabetes, if you have an A1C test, you're 6.5 or higher, you're considered diabetic. If you have a fasting plasma glucose test of 126, what does that mean? So basically, if you sleep through the night, you wake up in the morning and you haven't eaten anything, and then you go to the doctor and they give you this super nasty sugary drink, and you have to drink the whole thing, and then they test your blood sugar 2 hours later, or no, I'm sorry, no, this is fasting. So you haven't even had the sugary drink. This is the fasting. So you wake up in the morning, you haven't had anything. And you prick your finger, you test your blood sugar, and it's 126 or above, you're considered a diabetic. And if an oral glucose tolerance test, the other one I was just describing, you go through the night, or at any time, you don't even have to fast, at any time you drink this super sugary drink, they test you 2 hours later, if your blood sugar hits 200 or above, you're considered a diabetic. Also, if at any time ever you test yourself and you're 200 or above, you're considered a diabetic. And you can go on Amazon or you can go to Walgreens and you can buy a blood glucose monitoring test kit, and anybody can do it. You don't have to get a prescription. Basically, you just prick. They have these little needles that prick your finger, and you have this little thing about this size often, and it has these little test strips you put in it, and you just poke your finger and touch it there, and it will measure your blood sugar. So anybody can do it just to see how you're doing blood sugar wise. And I know, some folks also have the the continual glucose monitor, which yes, sister's got one right here. Maybe some of the rest of you do too, and which are really nice because they're continually checking to see how your blood sugar is. Because when you're just poking, you just do it every once in a while. You don't know where you're at all the time, but those are really handy. And so there are some dangers to prediabetes. If you have prediabetes, you have a 50% greater chance of having a heart attack or a stroke than someone who doesn't. And some of the side effects of diabetes are you're more likely to have a heart attack, stroke, nerve damage, or neuropathy. Now I'm going to show you a video clip that my wife and I were making a documentary a number of years ago, and this is some of these medical professionals we interviewed about neuropathy.
Difficult areas of diabetes is that people get what we call peripheral neuropathy.
Peripheral neuropathy is often a painful condition. It's like a pins and needles sensation that can be significantly painful enough that people are seeking pain medicines to try to control it.
Peripheral means out there at the ends, and so you see neuropathy. It's a pathy of the nerves. In other words, a disease of the nerves.
It's a complication of diabetes where the nerve actually loses its ability to send messages to the spinal cord, and they can't feel it.
And there's numbness, and later on, pain. The most common thing I hear from people with neuropathy is when it's getting in its advanced stages, my feet feel like I'm walking on razor blades, even when they're laying down.
And the most common reason in the Western world is diabetes and alcohol. Alcohol can also cause peripheral neuropathy. And that is a condition that is thought to previously not been able to be reversed.
Now, if you talk to most people who manage diabetes, they'll say, we're going to try to manage your peripheral neuropathy, and we're really we can't reverse it, but we're going to slow it down, and we're going to try to make it not get worse. If people stay on this program, they can reverse their peripheral neuropathy.
The astonishing thing is you put people on a plant-based diet, using only plants for food sources, and using them unrefined. Those are the two big issues. There's other smaller issues you can talk about that might have small effects, but if the food source is plants, and if it's unrefined, those are the two big issues. How you cook it, whether you cook it, all kinds of other things you hear out there are very, very minor issues in comparison to simply, it comes from plants and it's unrefined. And these people, 90% of them have complete relief from their neuropathy, complete relief. And often in a very short period of time. In fact, we get a group of 30 or 40 people in our seminars. We do these reversing diabetes seminars. We find that almost everybody with neuropathy will say within 2 or 3 days, it's getting better.
I really like the reversing diabetes programs because I can really see results really fast. If I bring somebody in and try to get them to lose 200 pounds, I'm not going to see much in 2 days. I'm not going to see anything in 2 days probably. But in a diabetic, I can see dramatic changes in 2 days. we have an 18-day program where it's focused on lifestyle, people with heart disease and stroke and peripheral vascular disease, the diseases in diabetes, all of the diseases of Western lifestyle. We actually test their blood at the beginning of the program, we test them at the end, and the results are often stunning. I mean, like a 40% reduction in triglycerides, a 30 or 40% drop in their cholesterol. Their blood pressure across the board, the blood pressure drops while on medication. In fact, it's not uncommon. It will take a lot of people off their medications while in the program because they don't need it anymore. And that's what's really amazing. This thing is really a paper tiger. It doesn't have to kill you. It can save you.
And that is actually normal, that within about 2 days of going on the therapeutic diet, people start to reverse. It doesn't go fully away in 2 days, but within 2 days, 2 to 3 days, typically the terrible pain that they said can feel like you're walking on razor blades. And within 2 days, it starts to get better, and it gets better and better. And over the course of about 3 weeks, 90% of people will reverse the disease. And the medical professionals will tell them there's nothing you can ever do to reverse it. But it's simply not true. The good news is, in most cases, it can be reversed. So now I'm going to explain to you how glucose and insulin work for a healthy person. And the Bible says in Leviticus 17, verse 11, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." So we have to understand how the blood works. Well, here is a human being, here's a man, and you notice this thing wiggling there, that is his pancreas. Now, it wouldn't be in the front like that, it would actually be behind the stomach, but I put it there so you could see it. And basically, if you eat a meal, just like many of you just have, you've eaten this meal, and it's beginning to break down in your stomach, and the body, it will take up some of the fats, proteins, carbohydrates, will begin to send them forth. Some of the fat and the glucose as it goes into the bloodstream, specifically looking at the glucose as it goes in the bloodstream. Now, the standard fuel for the cells of our body, for things like your liver cell, your pancreas, your muscles, the main fuel for those things is called glucose. It's a simple sugar. And so as you eat it, you eat these things, your stomach begins to break it down and begins to send it into the bloodstream. So as the sugar starts to get into the bloodstream, the body senses this, and so it tells your pancreas to help make a key to help that sugar to get into the cells, because the main source of fuel for your cells is glucose. So here's a simple picture of a cell. So here you have a cell, and here you have some glucose, because you've just eaten a meal and it's in your bloodstream, and you need a key to be able to unlock your cells. My wife and I traveled around, we traveled for 24 years, but we lived in a motorhome for 4 of those years traveling, and it was a good-sized motorhome, so they put a key on the gas tank, actually, because it's such a big gas tank that people might want to open it and siphon off your fuel. And so you needed a key to put the fuel in the tank. And so too with the cells in your body, like your muscle cells, your liver cells, you need a key to be able to open it up to get the fuel in the tank, which is the cell. And so how does that work? Well, the pancreas makes the keys, and those keys are called insulin. So I made a video, I put this together, I made this video so you can understand these flower-shaped things here. This is insulin, and the balls are glucose or sugar. And remember, the sugar is the main source of fuel for the cells. Your cells want the simple sugar to get energy. And so what ends up happening is, a healthy person, non-diabetic, eats a meal, their pancreas realizes, okay, there's sugar coming in there, the fuel's coming in, we want to get that in the cell. And so the pancreas will send forth the keys, which are insulin, and those keys, this is the wall of the cell here, and the insulin will attach to the insulin receptor. When it opens up, or the insulin receptor, it opens up the cell so that the glucose can get into the cell. And because the glucose gets into your cells, you don't have high blood sugar. But if it can't get in the cells, you end up having high blood sugar. Now that's how it works for a healthy person. Your pancreas, just behind your stomach, will produce the keys, which are insulin, and you eat a meal, and some of that glucose, that sugar, gets into the bloodstream, and it goes to the insulin receptor, and that opens it up for the glucose to get in. And perfect health depends upon perfect circulation. This is for a healthy person. But now let's find out how glucose and insulin work for a type 1 diabetic. Well, same picture, same video, but in a type 1 diabetic, the pancreas has been damaged. the beta cells which produce the insulin have become damaged, and now they can't produce any keys anymore, or at least not enough keys. So what happens is they eat a meal with fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. The body begins to break it down, sends it forth into the bloodstream, but because the pancreas can't produce any keys, there's no keys in this video. There is sugar, and the sugar comes, but what happens? It can't get in. Why not? Because there's no key to unlock the cell, and because of that, this person will have high blood sugar. That's a type 1 diabetic, and they have to get it in those cells, or in time they will die. And so they will end up having to either inject insulin or use an insulin pump that will help send keys into the bloodstream so that they can get the glucose, the sugar, into the blood, and then they can have energy once again. And so once again, the pancreas is damaged, so there's no keys, so the glucose can't get in. But now I want you to notice how, by the way, a type 1 diabetic is less than 10% of people with diabetes. The vast majority of them are type 2 diabetics. And here's another video, very same thing. The only thing that looks different at this point is you may notice there's kind of a color shift to the cell. Before it was more reddish, now it's more toward the pinker side, because in our illustration, what's happened here is this cell has more fat within it. This doesn't mean that a type 2 diabetic is fat necessarily. They may be overweight, but they don't have to be. But it means they have more fat within their cells. There are people who are thin who have way too much fat. They have low muscle mass and a lot of fat. And so it could be either way. They could be overweight, or they could be thin and too much fat within the cells. The scientific term for this fat within the cell, it's intramyocellular lipid. It means fat within the cell. And so in this case, it's kind of like the fat within the cells is like if somebody came to your house. So at your house, you probably have a keyhole to open the door to your house. And imagine while you're here tonight, one of your neighborhood children runs up to your house and takes some bubble gum and they shove it in the keyhole. So you have a good key, and you have a good keyhole, but it's real tough to get your key in there because they gummed it up with bubble gum. So what would be the best thing to do with your keyhole? Well, the best thing would be to try to get that gum out of the keyhole, and then your key's going to work again. And the keyhole's going to be receptive again. Now, in this case, what happens is, because you don't have bubble gum in the keyhole, you have fat within the keyhole, and so what it does is it resists the key, just like the bubble gum resists the key. So the term that the scientists use is they call this insulin resistance. Insulin resistance. And so let me show you how it works. So you got, now type 2 diabetics produce keys. Their pancreas generally will work for many years. Now they can damage it over maybe decades, can actually damage it, and they can turn into what's called type 1.5. But often for a very long time, their pancreas still works. And it actually pumps out more insulin than a healthy person. It actually puts out more keys, and this is why. So what happens is, this fat blocks the insulin receptor and makes it not connect well. And so because of that, the sugar struggles to get inside of it. So over time, what the pancreas does is like, hey, that didn't work. Those keys didn't work. And so the body says, well, then send some more keys. And they just keep chucking keys at it. And then what happens is, after a while, even the extra keys that the body produces may not be enough. So then what happens is, then they even have to start sometimes injecting insulin into their bodies also. And but here's the thing. People think the problem, the reason for diabetes is sugar. But it's not actually the cause of diabetes. The cause of diabetes is too much fat within the cells. And what that does is, it's because it can't get into these cells, you have high blood sugar. So the high blood sugar people think, oh, that's the problem. No, that's not the problem. The problem is the bubble gum in the keyhole or the fat within the cell. If you could get the fat out of the cell, then the keys will start working in it. The insulin will start working in it. So once again, the type 2 diabetics, their pancreas works, it produces keys, but those keys are not working very well. The cells are not very receptive, and so it's hard to get the blood sugar in. And but this is fascinating. There is something called IDEs. And these are, they're called insulin-degrading enzymes. It reminds me of, you remember during the Iraq War, they would have these things called IEDs, improvised explosive devices. You remember that? That a lot of our soldiers were getting killed by these roadside bombs or whatever. Same letters, just kind of mixed up the order of them. But IDEs are insulin-degrading enzymes. If you eat all day long, so you eat a meal, and then a little while later you have a little snack, and a little while later you have another little snack, and a little while later you have a meal, and there's always food in your stomach. See, what happens is that your body is always having to pump insulin. It's always having to shoot out insulin because you're constantly having blood sugar spikes. They're constantly going up. And so then what ends up happening, you have high insulin levels. And the body recognizes, hey, we got too much insulin here, so the body has to try to clean up that insulin. And the way that it cleans up insulin are these things called insulin-degrading enzymes. And here's the thing though, insulin-degrading enzymes have two jobs. One of them is cleaning up excess insulin, but its second job, its part-time job, is cleaning up plaque in your brain. But here's the problem. If you're constantly keeping your insulin-degrading enzymes busy cleaning up insulin, they won't have time to clean up the plaque in your brain. And so constantly eating, snack after snack. There's this popular thing in, actually I'll get to it, but there's this popular idea that you should eat 5 or 6 meals a day. And that will keep people the thinnest. But we'll look at the research in just a moment. So, certain countries of the world had populations that were largely atherosclerosis free, meaning heart disease free. The number one killer in the United States is heart disease. But there were nations of the world where they had near zero rates. You could cut people open and they had just clean arteries, clean blood vessels as elderly people. Yet it's the number one killer here. Like for instance in Japan. Now that's basically, back during World War II, it's interesting, at that time they had such low levels of heart disease in Japan that they would have to ship over cadavers from the United States to show them what plaque in the arteries look like. Because they just didn't have the stuff. Well, Japan has become self-sufficient now. They don't need to ship over cadavers anymore. Because they eat more a bit like, not nearly as bad as we do, but they eat much worse than they used to. And because of that, they have become self-sufficient in heart disease. They have plenty of cadavers of their own to share with themselves. And so, but historically, many nations were at very, very low levels. Well, basically, they looked at these cultures, and sorry, I should have made these words bigger, but there was a group of people in Africa called the Bantus who lived on a 10% fat diet, and they had heart disease rates near 0%. New Guinea, where they also ate a 10% fat diet, of 600 autopsies, only one person died from heart disease. One person out of 600. I mean, that's significantly less than 1%. I mean, just a fraction of 1% of people, having a heart attack, where it's our number one killer here. And in area of Ecuador, 800 people studied, and they ate mainly a whole plant-based diet with 1 serving a week of animal protein. They also had heart disease rates near 0, and 25 population on low-fat diets had a low level of heart disease. Well, so Pritikin helped do some research because he thought, okay, if you look around the world and you look at places that have no heart disease, what if we just fed people like the people in those countries? Now, by the way, most of these nations don't eat the way they used to. This is an older study, and now most of the world has become wealthier and we can have more refined junk food. And so, but what did they find? So Pritikin in the Journal of Applied Nutrition, they did a study with 38 men with advanced hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, average age of 60. They put them into 2 groups. So much, they were struggling so much that they could not walk on a treadmill faster than 1.5 miles per hour without pain stopping them, that terrible angina, that crippling chest pain. They did angiograms and it showed clogging of the arteries even after these guys had had bypasses. And the control group and the experimental group were both told to walk daily and try to stop smoking, but the control group would not change their diet. And the experimental group ate the diet of atherosclerosis-free populations in the world, eating an average of 80% carbohydrates. They found that the cultures in the world that didn't have heart disease, 80% carbs, roughly about 10% fat, 10% protein. And so what happened when they put people with heart disease on that diet? Well, the result is that in 2 weeks, their cholesterol went down an average rate 30%. And I know people say today, oh, cholesterol doesn't matter. That's done by meat industry-funded studies. What they've shown is if you have high cholesterol and somebody has a little higher cholesterol than a guy with high cholesterol, their chances of death is not very different. And so they'll say, look, there's no correlation. And then they'll say, oh, people with normal cholesterol die of a heart attack. But they don't tell you also that those people are on medication for high cholesterol. And so they're not talking about taking people with low cholesterol naturally from a healthy lifestyle. They're talking about a drug-induced, semi-normal cholesterol while you're still eating an unhealthy diet. Trying to push it down doesn't actually reverse heart disease all the time. Sometimes it does actually to a small degree, and it can somewhat make a difference. And I'm not promoting the drugs. This is what the research actually shows. And so 5 weeks on a treadmill as they change their lifestyle, 5 weeks on treadmill, their skill increased on the treadmill by 800%. 9 of the men who were hypertensive, they had high blood pressure, when the study began, were off all their medication and not hypertensive in 5 weeks. Most people can get off all their meds with their doctor's help, by the way, by simply going on the diet that we're talking about here, which is the therapeutic diet, roughly 10% fat diet. And 4 of the subjects were diabetics, 2 of which were on insulin. Within 6 weeks, all were off all drugs and insulin by going on the therapeutic diet. It's fascinating. And this is fascinating. H.S. Sweeney, in a study in the Archives of Internal Medicine, they took medical students who were put on 4 different diets: high fat, high carb, high protein, and fasting. And 2 days later, these are normal, healthy college students. They put them on a high fat diet, and 2 days later, they did a glucose tolerance test. So you go on this high fat diet or high protein diet or these different diets, and then they make you 2 days later drink a bunch of sugar water. And then they test your blood sugar later, and 2 hours later, and this is what happened. The high protein diet became pre-diabetic within 2 days. So you go on a super high protein diet, and you can turn yourself into a pre-diabetic. And within just 2 days. The high-fat diet group, healthy college students on a high-fat diet, 2 days later drank a bunch of sugar water, and they had diabetic blood sugar levels within 2 days. Now, why would the high-fat diet? Now, if you just stick with a high-fat diet, you can look like you're not diabetic anymore. Because what can happen is you probably heard the keto diet. It's very popular today, one of the most popular diets, other than maybe the carnivore diet, which has become very popular. People go on these things, they're like, hey, my diabetes went away. I don't have high blood sugar anymore. And it's true. You can stabilize your blood sugar on a keto diet or a carnivore diet. You say, well, how's that? Because you're eating such low carbohydrates, you don't see a spike in your blood sugar. But here's the thing. Give those people a banana, and immediately with it, what will they have? They'll have diabetes. And so what they have is they have insulin resistance, they just don't know it because they're not testing their body. It would be kind of like this. So they're like, hey, I've reversed the disease, but they're not testing their body to see if they have the disease. It would kind of be like if I had let's say I had a terrible problem with my foot. I had some disease of the feet and it caused terrible pain when I walked. And then you see me later, you're like, Chad, how you doing? I'm like, I have no pain at all. They're like, oh, really, you're healed? Oh, absolutely. What do? I just don't walk anymore. Well, it's like, well, you don't really know if you have the disease unless you test it, right? And so the only way to test it is, are you insulin resistant? You should be able to eat a banana without your blood sugar spiking into 200. It just shouldn't happen. If you don't have the fat within the cells, this intramyocellular lipid, you can test it and you'll have normal blood sugar even if you eat a meal with a bunch of fruit in it. You won't have the high blood sugar because you don't have the fat within the cells. And also, the research shows that the ketogenic diet is successful at reversing type 2 diabetes. What they found is that for the first year, it is very successful at helping people get back into a more normal A1C, the hemoglobin A1C test. So basically cutting out their diabetes. But within 2 years, they're typically back to the same point they were in the beginning. It's probably because they keep pounding down the fat, and it does start then adding up in the cells, making this intramyocellular lipid. So it does work for a time, I'm not going to deny that, but the best thing would be to get the fat out of the cells so that the cells can uptake the glucose so you are not insulin resistant. And yeah, we'll go forward. So the high carbohydrate group was completely normal. They did not become diabetic eating a high-carb diet. And but it was strange that the fasting group also did have prediabetes, because if you slam a bunch of sugar after you've been fasting, you can also spike blood sugar, not to full diabetic levels typically, but that's why if you do fast sometime, don't eat a ton of food afterward. Eat very simply afterward and slowly work your way back into food. But here's an even crazier study, and I'm not suggesting you do this. This is an insane study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. They took people, they put them on two diets. One group had a 5% fat, very low fat diet, and 80% table sugar. So imagine you come into a study, you sit down at a table, like, okay, we're going to feed you now. And they're like, okay, here's some oil, and here, just start spooning, shoveling sugar into your mouth. Now, if you like sweets, you might like about the first taste, but you can imagine it would become disgusting. They literally made these people eat 80% of their diet was pure refined sugar. Terrible diet, I'm not promoting that. And or they put them on a separate diet with 65% fat, which is oil, and 20% sugar. And what ended up happening? After 2 weeks, the high-fat group was considered diabetics. The ones who had 65% oil can turn you into a diabetic. And the 5% fat group, eating 80% pure sugar, continued the diet for an additional 7 weeks and was still found to have normal blood sugar levels. By eating pure sugar with a low-fat diet, they couldn't get people to become diabetics. You may have heard, but Chad, sugar turns into fat. That is a half-truth. It is true that tons of sugar can turn into a small percentage of fat. It's actually difficult for the body to turn sugar into fat. What's easy for the body is to turn fat into fat. It's actually very easy for the body. It doesn't take much work. You can turn sugar. Now, I'm not promoting white sugar. White sugar is junk food. So don't leave tonight thinking, I just went to a seminar where a guy was telling us to eat 80% sugar. No, my wife and I, we don't cook with sugar. We just don't do that at all. We don't, that's not what we do. I'm not just telling you never can. I'm just saying, I'm not promoting refined sugar, but they can't turn people into diabetics eating pure sugar. So what is the actual cause? It's not the sugar, it is the fat getting in the cells, blocking up the cells, and then not allowing the sugar into the cells, so the sugar then sits in the blood, and you have high blood sugar. So the high blood sugar is a symptom of the problem, it's not the cause of the problem. You want to reverse the cause, which is the fat within the cell. And that's why they use the therapeutic diet. So how about a lower percent fat? Instead of, 80 insulin-dependent patients were put on a 12% fat diet, and even if you get lower than 12, it makes an even bigger difference. But less than 5 months later, 72% of them were off their insulin, and the bulk of the others had lowered theirs. And another thing you can do to help you lower your blood sugar, especially if you're super easy to do if you're tired. You can do this at work too if you're in the right work environment. But directly after a meal, if you will go for a walk, for every minute you walk after a meal, and I mean directly, I don't mean an hour later, but every minute you walk directly after the meal, you will lower your blood sugar on average by about 1 to 3 points. So that would be like, basically, if you went on a 10-minute walk, you may lower your blood sugar up to, or lower it 30 points in some cases. So it's 1 to 3 points. So half hour, you might drop it 90 points and it's probably those who need to reverse it the most, it's going to make the biggest difference. A thin person, it's not going to make as big of a difference. Larger person, it's going to make a greater impact because it's more of a workout for a larger person. So walking after a meal, and by the way, if you wait an hour after your meal, it's too late. You won't be able to lower your blood sugar at that point. You will already have spiked to the level that it's too late. So if you really struggle with it, I would even encourage you, if you even have to leave the plates and stuff there, go for a walk, come back afterward, you can clean up. I'm not saying you have to do that, I'm not ordering you to do that, but if you really struggle with blood sugar, that's something you can do to help stabilize your blood sugar. And one spike in your blood sugar isn't going to destroy you, it's the years and years of doing it that damages the blood vessels, damages the nerves, and so forth, cause things like neuropathy. Well, research in the Journal of the American Medical Association Neurology reveals that exercise can lower the burden of beta amyloid, that's a plaque, in the brain and may lessen gray matter volume loss. As we get older, the gray matter, the outer portion of the brain, shrinks. But exercise can help reverse that loss, or lessen it anyways. In other words, exercise may lower the age-related shrinkage of the brain and may help lessen memory loss. Now, Dale Bredesen, who wrote he's the one who showed that you could reverse this in many cases, Alzheimer's, that he suggests that 5 to 10 hours of moderate exercise and 2.5 to 5 hours of vigorous exercise weekly. So this is more exercise than you'd be typically told to do, but if you have Alzheimer's or dementia, whatever it takes to save yourself, right? I mean, if you could avoid coming down with the most dreaded disease, at least one of the most dreaded diseases, so 5 to 10 hours of moderate exercise a week and 2.5 to 5 hours of vigorous exercise weekly. And Wes Youngberg, a fella, he's a medical professional that I interviewed for one of our documentaries. He also wrote a book showing how his patients were able to reverse this. And this, you've got to get them out. And when people get dementia, they often don't want to exercise. So this man, his wife came down with dementia, and he would try to get her. He knew about this. He's like, I got to get her up walking a lot, and I need 5 to 10 hours a week. So he'd say to his wife, hey, let's go for a walk. She's like, no. As you get dementia, you often become more childlike, and like, a 3-year-old, you ask them to do anything, and what do they say? No, no. And as you go into dementia, it often happens again. And so what this man thought, his wife didn't want to do it. She was just fighting it. Not angry, but just, no, no, no. And finally he thought, you know what? She loves to go to the mall. So he said to her, you want to go to the mall? Oh, yes. And then he would just walk around the mall with her. So he got her to do the same thing. He just had to come up with a creative way to get her to want to do it. It worked. So every day I'd be like, hey, you want to go to the mall? Yes, let's go. And he would get her walking and walking and walking that way. And another thing is green leafy vegetables. Research in the journal Neurology reveals that one serving of green leafy veggies, things like spinach, kale, etc., lower the memory loss associated with cognitive decline. And I want to show you a video of a fellow who came to a seminar my wife and I were doing. His name was Del. Now this is just 2.5 weeks after he came to a seminar just like this. He chose, at 80 years old, to implement the therapeutic diet. He went hardcore, he went fully into it. He came to the seminar in the beginning with depression. He was walking with a cane, he was walking slow, he looked sad. And I didn't know for sure if he was depressed, but he told me afterward that he had been depressed. And he's going to tell you his story real quickly, as he'll tell you his story.
I've been diagnosed as a diabetic for a little over 20 years. And because of my family background,
I'm sorry, we're going to have to watch it again.
I've been diagnosed as a diabetic for a little over 20 years. And because of my family background, all 4 grandparents were diabetic. Mom and dad were diabetic. My brother, who passed away a few years ago of diabetic complications, is diabetic. And so with that history, I would be extreme chance for being dead by the age of 40. My side effects were mostly neuropathies. The neuropathy is a feeling you get. It's comes from within the nerve system, deteriorating due to the blood sugar situation. And mine was numbness in my feet. My feet, half of both feet were always numb, and sometimes even back as far as my heel coming up toward my ankle on some days, but always half a foot. At night, periodically, the rubbing of my feet on the sheets would feel like they were being rubbed on a red hot iron. It's like they were being blistered. I'd have to put my feet out from under the covers and over the edge of the bed so they weren't touching anything. But the numbness never went away, day or night. I started this therapeutic diet idea before I knew it was therapeutic diet, about a week or maybe 2 before I met Chad and was introduced to the therapeutic diet concept. I had started adding more fruit, fresh fruit and more fresh vegetables to an already vegetarian diet. But I was lacto-ovo, that's milk and eggs and cheese vegetarian. We went to the gut-brain, brain-gut connection, and got a hold of the recipe book and started some real changes. And within 3 days, the numbness was progressing out of my feet. Within a week, I was down to where I just had 2 toes on each foot that were numb 24/7. And then a few more days, that went where I could have feeling on the tops of all my feet, all my toes, all my foot. Another day went by, it was down to 1 toe. Next to the big one, the second toe on both feet were the only numbs. Then that went down to where it was down to just 1 toe, and now the numbness has gone out of all toes and feet. I have a little bit of residual, kind of a fluffy, fuzzy feeling in the left second toe. But basically, I could say it's 99.9% gone. So that's gone. The other thing that I noticed that showed up, I didn't even think about it at the time, but I had been unable to work more than 5-10 minutes out in the yard, and then I'd have to come in and rest for half an hour. And the other day, I was out pruning shrubs and carrying the debris out of the yard, putting it into the pickup. And I was out there for a little over 3 hours, and I came in feeling better than when I went out. So the energy factor is something that kind of surprised me. I didn't expect. So, you know. So it's been an amazing 2.5, 3 week trip. If it keeps like this, look out, boy. Yeah, the world's gonna know I'm here.
And so within 2.5 weeks, his depression went away. Like you said, he went from being able to work like just a few minutes outside, 15 minutes outside, and having to take, what was it, a half-hour break or whatever it was, and being able to work 3 hours straight. This is 2.5 weeks. He did it at 80 years old. I was 35, and I did the therapeutic diet because I had the gallbladder issues. And within 3 days, the pain went away, and my energy just skyrocketed. I had more energy at 35 than I did when I was 16 or 18 years old. It literally transformed my life. And I love seeing these old guys come. And it's not just old people that try, but I love these 80-year-old guys who come up to me like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. And they fully implement it, and they find the benefits of it. They feel phenomenal. And I think, I'm too old. You can't. An old dog can't learn new tricks. It's like, no, he did. And and 2.5 weeks into it, 99.9% neuropathy gone. Something that nothing the medical profession could do for him. And here he could do just by changing his lifestyle. And he came to those meetings. His depression went away, and he didn't have a cane anymore. He was walking with pep in his step after that point. It just changed his life. He felt phenomenal. He was willing to go through the suffering, and sometimes now, to feel better, sometimes we do have to go through some suffering. Like I said, sometimes it takes a week for the taste bud to change. It's not easy. But, come on. Anybody can go through suffering for 1 week, right? And he's going through suffering every day of his life. This is just a little other suffering, and it's like, well, then you like the food just as much as you liked your old food, and now you have energy and happiness, and the depression is gone, right? So you actually gave up nothing except for, maybe some taste buds for a few days, right? And so he found that, and the Bible says, Psalms 103, verse 5, that God is the one who satisfies your mouth with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Isn't that beautiful? Dell found that at 80 years old. Right? It literally is true. This is not just a figurative statement. It is true. And so I'm not here to push anybody to try it, but it's been one of the greatest experiences in my life. And that's why I share these. I'm the least likely person to be up here teaching you about this therapeutic diet. As was shared here, I was in college and I had never had a salad one time in my life, ever. I had never had lettuce, even on a hamburger, in my whole life. Just never had these things. I ate junk food and meat. They were my favorite food, and that's just the way I lived. And my parents never suggested eating. They never even said, hey, what, do you want a salad? Never asked that. I just thought, I looked at it, I'll tell you how bad it was. I had a teacher when I was in grade school. She told us she was going to bring cabbage to school, and we were all going to have to try it. And so you know what I told my mom? I was sick that day. I couldn't fathom putting some vegetable like that in my mouth. I mean, that was horrifying to even consider something like that. And here I am putting on seminars about this stuff, years later. And so I'm not here forcing anybody into this, but if you struggle with some of these things, you might find some of the very same benefits and find like the cultures around the world historically, at least 25 cultures around the world who just ate this way naturally and had near zero rates of heart disease. Obviously many of them are poor countries, so they might have parasites, but they didn't have all these, heart disease and these Western diseases like type 2 diabetes and so forth. Does anybody have any questions? We're just about, I'll close after that. If anybody has any questions, we'll say a prayer and then any question. You don't have to have questions, but yes.
The studies out now on cholesterol levels are higher. I follow Barbara O'Neill sometimes.
Yes.
And some of the cholesterol levels, to me, one says this, one says that. In your opinion, what are the highs?
Okay, it's a good question. So if you look at levels of cholesterol, you'll hear people say you need cholesterol. Absolutely true. You need cholesterol. Cholesterol is itself good for you. And so is blood. Blood is good for you. So you need to eat blood, right? No, you don't necessarily need to eat it. The body actually produces blood. So you don't have to eat blood. And eating blood doesn't actually give you blood. It will break down the blood into something and then it will remake it into blood. But you don't need it. Now, same thing with cholesterol. Your body produces cholesterol naturally. It is a natural process of the body. And you will not get too low cholesterol without pushing it with drugs. And even then, they've even pushed people's cholesterol super low, but nobody ever pushes it to the point where they don't have cholesterol. I've never heard of a study that actually showed that. But back to the question of how high. Now, so normal is considered under 120. That's normal. The trouble is that it is normal in the United States to have a heart attack. So is it healthy to have normal cholesterol? No. And that's what they say. Look, people are dying with the normal cholesterol. But to have normal cholesterol in America is not healthy. Mm-hmm. So what is a more healthy cholesterol would be a question, not what is, because it's normal. 76% of Americans are overweight or obese. So it is abnormal to have a normal body weight. So what would normal be? What would normal be for cholesterol? A normal total cholesterol would probably be about under 150. Not under 200 like is normally stated in the medical profession. And getting your, I should remember the exact number for your LDL. People say, oh, people think high LDL is a problem. It's not. And they're using these beef industry funded studies that are trying to show that it's okay so people aren't afraid. Or these, basically studies that are trying to make a point. And you can prove whatever you want almost in a way. But getting your total cholesterol, I want to say under about 65, your not total cholesterol, your total cholesterol 150, I think it's 65. I have a chart, I can look at it afterward just to clarify for sure. But I think it's your LDL should be under about 65 or 60, and it's even lower if you've already had a heart attack, but if you haven't had one, it can basically stop, if I had my heart disease presentation up, I can show you very quickly. But it's significantly lower than what they suggest. And that's why people say, look, you're still having heart attacks when you have normal cholesterol. But once again, normal is abnormal worldwide. So 150 is about, under 150 is about, and I always had high cholesterol until I went on the therapeutic diet. I even had high cholesterol as a plant-based eater. Because high-fat plant-based foods don't have cholesterol in them, but they can make your body produce higher levels of cholesterol, so you end up having high levels of cholesterol on a plant-based diet. But when you get to most people on a low-fat plant-based diet will get on a low but healthy, not low like no cholesterol. You still have ample cholesterol, just not too much. Any other questions? Yes?
You said anything about concrete not being ingested? Can
So,
you get tea out of it, or?
Many people do. It's common in Europe. The only reason I say not to is because the scientists say not to, and I'm being recorded.
What about tea?
The tea, so meaning tea is common like in Europe, but the scientists say not to drink it.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm telling you what the science say,
Yep.
but I will tell you that people have used it internally for centuries, and it does stop internal bleeding, at least anecdotally, people who have internal bleeding and issues. So I'm not telling you you can't do it, but the researchers suggest not doing it. Yes? All right, well, let's close with prayer. We've got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, so let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together. Lord, I don't know all the health background of the people here, but Lord, if there's somebody here that would be blessed with these things, maybe has neuropathy or type 2 diabetes, it's even beneficial for type 1, though it doesn't reverse type 1. It can at least stabilize blood sugar in them also, Lord. But Lord, if there's somebody who this would be a blessing for, I pray that you give them the courage to say, why not? I can give it a try. I can suffer for a week and change my taste buds. And it's not us changing our taste buds. It's you creating within us the capacity for change. And as your word says in 1 Corinthians 15:57, but thanks be to God which gives us the victory, that you can help us do anything through Christ. And Lord, it's such a joy to see people's lives changed, and if there's someone here that this would be a blessing to, I pray they give it a try and find the great blessings also, and that they may help by that change other people's lives through their own personal testimony. We thank you for your love in Jesus' name.